Thanks so much. We're going to welcome now people filtering in for the first plenary of the week, which is about a topic which is hugely important and hugely relevant to the ANH Academy. Grounded in our very mission and our goals that were established when we began, is a sense of breaking down barriers that prevent access and participation in science, and also the types of evidence that are generated. And this could not be a more important and timely topic that relates to that. I won't say any more because I'm going to pass over now to the moderator, who is Poonima Menon, who is the Senior Research Fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute based in New Delhi. And yeah, over to you, Poonima.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joe. And congratulations to the ANH Academy team for yet another amazing kickoff to what I know is an amazing program ahead of all of us. I'm really honored to have the privilege to moderate this opening session. It's something that means a lot to me professionally, and also a lot to me personally, from all the many sort of identities and standpoints that I carry in the research and in the engagement work that I do in my career. ANH has always been committed to being an inclusive platform for research on food systems and nutrition around the world. Together with the Academy, the work on the Amana grants, and in a sense, the proliferation of many different programs of research on food systems and nutrition that we have seen over the last many years. I think as time has gone by and as research has accumulated on the field, we have begun to see issues of inequity become more apparent. These issues of inequity, which we'll hear a few little notes about soon and then discuss in more depth, are what we really want to focus our discussion on today. I think we want to shed some light on what some of these inequities in publishing and in publications look like. What are the origins of what may just be, in a sense, the most visible tip of the iceberg, and what are the origins of those across the research continuum, not just in the most visible publications. We'll want to discuss solutions, and we'll want to identify and in a sense commit to actions that each of us can take as researchers, as collaborators, as funders, to begin to reduce some of the inequities that we think are so incredibly problematic in the knowledge ecosystem related to food systems and nutrition. So please join me in welcoming our incredible speakers and panelists for today's session. I don't want to keep us from hearing from them. So let me just say a brief word about each of them and then move us through the session. So we'll have a brief opening presentation today by Sweta Manohar, who's with the Global Food Ethics and Policy program at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. And she's the co-coordinator of ANH Academy's Working Group on Inequities in Research and Practice. So really just a perfect presenter to kind of kick us off into the panel discussion. We have an incredibly diverse panel, people who have been sort of really interrogating issues of inequity in research and in research publication from all of their different standpoints. So we have Catherine Chobotunji, who is the director of the Africa Population and Health Research Center and co-editor-in-chief of PLOS Global Health. Welcome, Catherine. We have Alex Holcomb, who is a professor at the University of Sydney and co-creator of Tenzing and the Free Journal Network Advisory Board member. Welcome, Alex. We have Kui Muraya, who's a principal investigator in gender and health from the Kimberley Wellcome Trust Research Program. Welcome, Kui. And we have Johan Rurik, I hope I got that right, Johan, who's the executive director of Coalition S and the professor and editor-in-chief Glossa. So all of these individuals from the places that they work, they live, and the spaces that they inhabit, in and around research, have been thinking and really working very hard to try and identify solutions to unblock the inequities that we see. So without further ado, let me invite you, Shweta, to sort of give us our opening framing presentation before we move into the panel discussion. Over to you, Shweta.
Thank you, Poonima, for those introductions. It's my pleasure to be part of the plenary today and to share with you some ongoing work the ANH Academy has been engaged with on inequities in agriculture, health, and nutrition research, as well as practice. So today's plenary was planned against a larger or broader backdrop of inequities that exist in the production of knowledge related to global health, global nutrition, food systems, and related research. But additionally, against an even broader backdrop of power imbalances from historical legacies of our field that skew representation of researchers and practitioners and the evidence base that underpins policy actions. These power imbalances reflect the well-documented colonial roots of global health research. And there is a critical mass that believe that there has been progress made over the years, that there are more inclusive partnerships, less extractive research, higher reciprocity, and so forth. And this may be true to an extent. However, there is the question of the quality and depth of these so-called improvements. There has been considerable resurgence of evidence in the past 5 or more years that show that perhaps, in fact, that this isn't the case. Within our community, this ANH community, we have additional complexities of inequalities our disciplinary trainings may impose and that we as researchers or practitioners might perpetuate. For example, interventions in global nutrition research is almost entirely shaped by researchers in high-income settings, are rarely participatory in nature, or that economists are not required, in some cases discouraged from involving multiple authors, missing out as a result contextual nuance to their analysis or interpretation of data. The research process consists of several steps that range from the conception to its sharing. So these include several steps that you see across the screen and across this research continuum, from funding to ultimately its dissemination through peer-reviewed publications and other platforms. So if we examine each step of this research process, we'll see that inequities exist along its continuum in the kind of work we undertake. One's experience of how you engage across this continuum might be shaped by your institutional affiliation, your geographic location, but also individual identity, such as your gender, race, social position, and other factors. So for example, let's just take one part of that continuum and let's look at the agenda setting and funding. Who holds the power? The 2020 Global Health Report undertook an analysis that included all major players in global health organizations, so UN agencies, bilateral organizations, funding bodies, NGOs, research organizations, and so forth. 85% of organizations are headquartered in Europe or North America. 90% of their leaders in this field of these organizations have completed their education in a high-income country. Similarly, we see that these power asymmetries are coupled with gender inequalities, further perpetuating inequities in terms of who leads these priority-setting agencies. When it comes to research partnerships, we also find evidence of inequities. This is a quote from a research team member in Burkina Faso about who gets to conceptualize studies and who is left implementing it. So such findings, along with ongoing introspection of our own practices, is what has fueled the early phases of work on the inequities in agriculture, health, and nutrition research and practice, which we see as an emerging set of work, which will eventually allow us to formulate a formal working group. This emerging work is an initiative by the ANH community to highlight and address inequities across disciplines along the research continuum. It is hoped that it will be an open space for discourse on how inequities could be challenged to bring structural changes in the ways that we conduct interdisciplinary research by identifying problems, disciplinary challenges, and solutions, and to create momentum around these issues. These are some of the ongoing activities that you can see on the right of the screen that have been initiated, with more to come in the following months. The purpose of this work is really to identify disciplinary best practices in each step of the research process and learn from each other and inspire change through the sharing of tangible steps. The principles of equity in gray is what you see above the research continuum, are what we hope to ground our work in. Ultimately, if our goal is to transform food systems and improve the health and nutritional well-being of populations, we can really only do so by addressing these inequities and inequalities that persist in the knowledge production on these issues. It's important also on a human dignity, rights, and equity level. So for this year's presentation, or rather panel discussion, inequities in publishing is our focus. It's a convoluted process, publishing, and it has many aspects to consider as it relates to equity, from authorship, publishing fees, journal merit standards, standards of what knowledge is, and so forth. To help prime our discussion today, our working group leveraged data as an illustrative example to highlight inequities in publishing. The analysis was conducted by a team member, Emma Walton. So the objective of this work was to reveal proportional geographic representation of journal editorial boards and article authorship. To do this, we extracted country location of the institutional affiliation, first, second, and last author. Also, editorial board members, specifically their editors-in-chief and co-editors. And this was the information, especially about authorship, was sampled from the 100 most recent articles published between 2021 and 2022 from World Development, Food Policy, Global Food Security, and Nature Food. The selection of these journals was just that they were selected based on the fact that they're commonly used to disseminate research on low and middle income settings, as well as showcase work that we do within our community. Of note, authors with multiple affiliations were assigned a higher income country affiliation, just with the assumption that they would have access to certain resources and prestige offered by the affiliation, as well as this particular analysis was not adjusted for the available disciplinary expertise by country, as we didn't have that data. Finally, we extracted information on publishing model for each article. So if we look at this, we see author position by World Bank country income classification, revealing that 80% of first authors, 75% of last authors, and 73% of second authors are affiliated with an institution located in a high income country. Only 7% of first authors and 11% of last authors are affiliated with institutions in low and middle income country settings. Almost half of the articles examined had all three author positions affiliated with institutions in a high income country, and only 2% had all three from a lower middle income country setting, or from institutions in a lower middle income country setting. When we grouped countries by their geographic region, we saw a majority of authors, regardless of their positions, were affiliated with institutions based in North America. Approximately 20% of authors, whether first, second, or last, were from institutions in Central Asia or Europe. 15 to 18% were from East Asia and the Pacific, and only a fraction of authors were affiliated with institutions based in Africa, the Middle East, South Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean. One thing not reflected in these numbers, but worth considering, is within country inequities that might distinguish authors that are based in institutions in LMIC settings who are authors in such journals. Of the 6 editors-in-chief across the 4 journals, all 6 were affiliated with institutions in high-income countries, 3 from North America and 3 from the EU. Among the 27 co-editors on the editorial boards, 85% were affiliated with institutions in high-income settings, and only 3 within an institution in a low and middle income setting. When we looked at publishing model, 2/3 of the most recent articles published by these top journals between 2021 and 2022 were behind a paywall. So I'll just say that the data that we presented are not intended to be representative of the broader publishing industry, but rather to illustrate inequities that exist to spark further discussions today. And so with these points in mind, I will turn it over back to Purnima to bring into the discussion our wonderful panelists for this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shweta, for that very hard-hitting presentation. I mean, I've had the opportunity to see some of those results before, but I confess that seeing them again was equally as sobering as seeing them the first time. So let me call on the panel now. What we're going to do is have all four members of the panel address the same question. So our first question is really on sort of understanding and unpacking the challenge as we see it in this very visible problem of inequities in publishing. And so, Catherine, you'll go first. And I wonder if you can speak to the question on why do you think we are seeing these challenges? What are the biggest problems in our current publishing and knowledge ecosystem that are contributing to this kind of very, very skewed profile of the research landscape, where we have mostly researchers from high income country institutions doing research on low and middle income country situations. Please also, before you kick off in speaking to the challenges, please sort of also articulate your standpoint. Where are you coming from? Which identity are you drawing upon for yourself as you reflect on these? You'll have about 3 minutes for the first set of comments, and then I'll move to the next panelist. So over to you, Catherine. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, and thanks everyone for having me. And I think there's a lot that I could say about this particular topic. And of course, my perspective is from an African woman based in Kenya, where I've been for the last 15 years, struggling to be a researcher, struggling for relevance, and also for the last 4 years, a leader of an African institution that's trying to find its place and its voice in this whole discourse about what matters and what's important. And so from where I sit, I think really the whole knowledge system is broken. And unfortunately, the knowledge system is propping up study and practice. And therefore, when you think about the 3 domains of global health, I think it's the knowledge system that is driving and influencing the other 2 elements of global health. And so I look at the flawed global health system, the knowledge system. Part of it, I think, is the incentive structure that is built into it. Because the knowledge system is sort of like a self-reinforcing cycle, where, for instance, if you are an academic and you publish a number of papers, there's something it does to your CV, your profile. You become a little bit more competitive, more attractive to funders. So the longer your CV becomes, the longer your profile becomes, you're able to attract more funding, you do more research, you do more papers. So there are no incentives to say, okay, can you pause a little bit and say, maybe let's ask ourselves, after 200 papers, can you use that expertise to do something else? So the system has no incentives for people to just stop and focus on the value that they are producing to society. And I think, as I said, the reason why it influences other parts of global health is that as more and more people publish papers and their profiles get longer, then it's also their voices which get heard. If you're looking for an expert in any area, you Google them, you go to PubMed, and you find them. They're the ones who are going to be top on the list. So they shape policies, they shape programs, they shape funding decisions. And so in the end, over time, what gets done is shaped by research which has been done by somebody else who perhaps is more interested in doing more research and getting their profile longer, not in what actually does this research that I do, what value does it provide to society. So over time, the beneficiaries of this system become experts, they become thought leaders and many other adjectives. And therefore, you find that that's the center. They are the ones sitting at the table when WHO is looking for expert committees and all that. They're the ones who are sitting there. And so the poor researcher in an African country who doesn't have access to the same resources, they get relegated to data collectors. You collect data, you don't have funding to publish it, but you also spend an inordinately amount of time working with the decision makers. If you're an expert in my country, you spend a lot of time talking to government and technocrats, and that is not measured, it's not quantifiable. So in the end, we end up with, sometimes good, sometimes bad policies, sometimes good, sometimes bad programs. But I think ultimately, the reason why we still have so many problems in the world is because we are relying on a flawed knowledge system. And if we are to deal with some of these inequities, we need to put checks and balances about the value that we're trying to create as academics when it comes to publication. Over.
Thank you, Catherine, and also for being so phenomenally on time. So Alex, let me call on you now. What are you seeing as these challenges from your perspective? Please again, tell us what your perspective is, and then speak to the challenges that you're seeing in the knowledge system from that perspective. Alex.
Well, first, thanks for inviting me, and it's great to be part of such a diverse event. I come from psychology and neuroscience, kind of basic science, academic area, which is not nearly as diverse as this. So this is really exciting for me. But even in that kind of more cloistered, just high-income country basic research aspect, I was always frustrated with how journals work. And as I became a journal editor and tried to work on reforming journals and journal policies, I got even more frustrated. And that's led me to this perspective. I think journals, haven't changed much since the 1600s. They're fundamentally not innovative. And this is a big reason that we are having these problems. As Catherine said, it's fundamentally broken. It wasn't designed for the 21st century or even the 20th century. And maybe around the same time that people finally started becoming interested in equity, diversity, and inclusiveness, journals increasingly became controlled by corporations, not researchers. So in doing so, their priorities became not all aligned with the new agenda in academia. So that didn't help. And things continue to be based on the academic side on sort of personal networks, seniority, as Catherine referred to, old boys clubs, and these policies that written a long time ago that were based around a more elitist society. So that includes policies around authorship, for example, authorship guidelines of journals. Journals are not accountable or transparent in the traditional way that they do things. They're kind of these walled gardens or siloed kind of computer systems where you black boxes where you submit something and then you wait 2 to 10 months and see what comes out the other end without having any insight on what's going on inside of them, which makes it difficult to militate for change, and you're really at the mercy of these people who are very likely to be senior and to have succeeded based on the old on that system, unless they're not have an interest in reform. So one could even say that journals are often corrupt and certainly not responsive to the academics that are submitting to them, whether those are prestigious academics that have a long CV or a short CV, although of course they're a little more responsive to those who have a longer CV. And what journals do isn't evidence-based. Lots of errors occur in research, and we don't have a system that detects or corrects those errors. These journals are designed for one thing, for teams of researchers to get another line on their CV, not for a kind of community to come together around knowledge creation. Maybe I'll stop there for now.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Alex. Also sort of really hitting the right notes on time as well. My apologies there. Kui, let me call on you next. Again, please, what is the perspective and the standpoint that you're coming from, and what do you see as some of the biggest challenges here in our knowledge ecosystem?
Thanks. Thank you, Panimara. Thank you, ANH, for having me as part of this panel discussion. So I very much resonate with a lot of what Catherine said, but I'll also, I guess, add to that. So my own perspective is, as a Black African woman from sub-Saharan Africa, I identify as coming from a colonized history. And what does that mean when you're trying to succeed in a Western-centric or Western-centered system? So a lot of the work that I do, in fact, all of my work is locally rooted. So I do a lot of work with communities in Kenya, or at least, in Africa. But then I've come to realize over time that I largely, in fact, only publish in sort of global North health journals, or, my audience is essentially global North people primarily, even though I am doing this locally rooted work. And so this is something that I've been struggling with for a while now, because it's like, to be able to succeed in my chosen career, in my chosen field, I have to publish or perish, as they say, and not just publish or perish, but publish in high impact factor journals or perish. For me to be taken seriously, I need to have publication in particular journals. That's how I am taken seriously in the field. That's how I attract funding. That is how my work kind of gets read by people who quote unquote matter in the field. But I find this to be very flawed, because actually, ideally, my primary outputs should be to the people who are consumers of the knowledge that I'm producing. You know, my outputs, my audience, if you like, should be the, you know, the local policymaker or the, you know, the local consumers of my knowledge who can actually make decisions based on the evidence that I'm generating in this particular context. But that's not really how it works out. And instead of being judged on how many scientific publications have I published in X high impact factor journal, I wish we were being judged on, okay, what has been your output in the local knowledge platforms? How have you influenced, you know, local policies, or who has consumed your locally who has consumed your knowledge and used it to actually do something beneficial for the communities that you are working with. So for me, I do really find this to be a problem. I think one of the biggest problems that I see with knowledge production or academic publication is really it's Western-centered, the way it is Western-centered or Northern-centered, if you like, rather than you know, being about knowledge that is produced. Yes, it's important for the globe to read it, but primarily shouldn't it be informing and influencing the local context where that evidence was generated? And we need to start asking a question around the way academia and, you know, publishing, scientific publishing is structured right now. Is it in the best interest of everyone, or is it really highly exclusionary and excluding lots of people at a loss for all of us? Because then we end up missing out on very important information and knowledge that's being produced in contexts where people might not have the ability to, you know, publish in these high impact journals. Even for those of us who are privileged enough to have institutions that have supported us to do so, not all of us will be successful in publishing in these journals. And related to that also, and I've seen someone has raised a couple of points about language in the chat. I do agree with that I do think we need to question, challenge, and unpack the hegemony or the dominance of the English language, because I do think it's doing a disservice to the entire kind of global health community or academic researchers when I recognize the importance of having a common language that we can use to share information, but that's very different to privileging the English language. And I think as it stands right now, the English language is privileged. People who speak and write good English are more privileged than people who are writing in other languages. And we do need to think about how we can start changing that so that we're not excluding people who are producing valid and good knowledge that can be useful to the globe.
Johan, over to you now. Again, you know, do sort of speak to your standpoint and where you're coming from, and then your thoughts on the challenges.
Yes, thank you, Purnima. Thank you for inviting me, first of all, in this very diverse meeting. Indeed, as Alex already said. Like Alex, I'm a journal editor. I'm an editor of a Diamond Open Access journal called Glossa in linguistics, and linguistics has prepared me a little bit for diversity, because linguists, of course, work on a broad diversity of all the languages in the world. At the same time, so that's my bottom-up perspective, so to speak. I'm a journal editor with my feet in the field, and I work with authors and reviewers on a daily basis. On the other hand, I am also the executive director of Coalition S, and that's what I would call my top-down perspective. I'm now working with funders who are trying to realize open access to publications. And from that perspective, of course, what Coalition S is trying to do is very important, namely making research accessible to the world. Namely, all funded research of Coalition S funders will be made available open access. But that only solves, from my perspective, that only solves the reading part. I mean, it's no longer behind the paywall, so you don't have to pay to have access to it. Fine. I mean, that means everybody globally can access it. That's great. But the problem, from my perspective, still remains publishing itself. So if you're an author from a less privileged country and you don't have access to funding for producing the knowledge, for publishing it, either with an article processing charge or via transformative agreements that are concluded by your library, but your library cannot conclude those transformative agreements because there is no money, then what do? I mean, we really have a global equity problem there in terms of producing the knowledge from my perspective. And this is also something that was underscored by the recent UNESCO declaration of November 21. And so we really need to move to a globally equitable publishing system. And I have some thoughts about that I can share later, perhaps. I'll stop here for now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Johan. Let's move a little bit now to, speaking about solutions, but, before that, let me sort of try to paraphrase a little bit of what I heard from us. So I heard about a knowledge system and access to resources that support the generation of things like high quality or high impact journal publications that are more available to those in high income institutions. I heard about terribly broken incentives in academic institutions, perhaps around the world, not just in high income countries, but perhaps more dominant in high-income countries that deeply privilege large numbers of papers in high impact factor journals as prime considerations for academic trajectories of high-income researchers, which then, of course, makes them hew to those incentives and makes it challenging to be, for those who then have those research resources to also be more sort of more inclusive. I heard about the journals and the economic models of the journals being in sort of a corporate landscape. What does that mean for publishing? Because that absolutely then requires that people who are submitting papers and wanting to publish in these high impact journals, which are often all corporate owned, needing the kinds of funds that are needed for that. I won't go into some of the numbers, but some of the APCs are absolutely mind-boggling to me. And I think there's probably a lot of other more subtle challenges that play out, or more, they may not be that subtle really, that play out across the research continuum that really make it hard for some of the leading low and middle income country researchers who feel today like they may be seen as more data collectors to speak up in the context of very inequitable power relationships with even well-meaning high-income country collaborators and potential co-authors, right? So I'd really like perhaps for us in speaking about the solutions to perhaps speak to some of these issues. And of course, the last one, which I don't want to ignore, is this particular issue of language and the privileging of certain language for the writing. And even if it is not just the privileging of English, the privileging of the ability to write in certain ways for these journals is a real area of challenge for many researchers. So let's go back in the same order again. Catherine, again, from your standpoint, perhaps now as the editor-in-chief of PLOS Global Public Health, if I can ask you to speak to that. What do you see as some sort of spaces for optimism, but also some critical solutions that are necessary as we look forward to closing some of these incredible inequities?
Yes, so I'll put on my PLOS Global Public Health hat now and talk about some of our experiences in establishing this journal and getting it off the ground. The journal was launched in May last year, and so it's a little over a 1 year old. And in 1 year, we received about 4,000 submissions. The pace has sort of slowed down a bit, but the demand for the journal was quite incredible. And the response to the journal being launched was just incredible. Now, I think the key thing that I'll take away from the few months that we started this setup phase, when I was approached to be one of the co-editors in chief, one of the questions I asked was, what kind of journal is this? What is the ethos? What defines it? What is the brand? But also, is this a journal that's going to be accessible for the community it's intended to serve? And so with my co-editor-in-chief, we made it clear that we only accept to be co-editors-in-chief if there's an explicit policy about APCs. And PLOS already had a policy on APCs, but in the end, we looked at the policy and we said, yeah, this is actually satisfactory to us, because it didn't make sense for us to keep advocating for equity and then you still become a co-editor-in-chief of a journal, which excludes a large part of the population that we represent. So I think one of the challenges that we encountered is the invisibility that is conferred upon scientists and academics from low and middle income countries. And so our first challenge was setting up an editorial board. And we said, we're going to be committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Therefore, we want an editorial board that reflects the global community. And the first challenge we encountered is that the journal had an online submission system for people who are interested in becoming academic editors and section editors. And the first batch of submissions we got were almost 70% men, white, that are based in high-income countries, almost 70%, just at the drop of the hat. And of course, they're the ones who perhaps received the invitation, received the launch newsletter and all that. So we said, no, wait a minute. This can't be, business as usual. So I think the keyword I wanted to put into this whole session, my submission is about it being intentional about addressing some of these inequities. So we had to do a lot of outreach. The journal has taken so much of our time, but we said that's the only way we can sort of write this sort of status quo. If you let the status quo take over, then you'll get the kind of experience that we had. So we had to do a lot of outreach, snowballing and networking and all that. And it's not easy, it's been very hard, and we're not yet there. After all the work we've done, we have about 40% people who are not men who are white and from income countries, after all the efforts, but at least it's 40%, and I think we can take pride in that. And it goes back to invisibility, because the invisibility part of it is real. The fact that if you've not had a chance to publish, you're sort of invisible to, are you an expert? Are you expert enough? Are you qualified enough to be an academic editor? But the second is, I think, is cultural visibility. I found it in myself if you ask me, who is an expert, in non-communicable diseases, what image comes to mind? It goes to the professor I collaborate with at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. It doesn't go to the person I collaborate with in the Ministry of Health. So there's a perception we have about who's an expert, who's qualified to do anything. And therefore, those are the people we gravitate to. So we are being more intentional. Being an academic editor doesn't need you to have 200 papers and being, the thought leader. It needs somebody who understands publication, who has a decent record. 20 papers actually is what is required. So we looked intentionally for those people. And that's why we've managed to get to 40%. And I'll plug Global Law School of Public Health right now. If you know young women from the Global South who want to be academic editors, we are your guys. Please refer them. But it is intentionality and taking away those cultural barriers in our minds about who is qualified to do certain things. Over.
Thank you, Catherine. And as a member of your incredibly diverse editorial board, I think I really salute you and Madhupai for the efforts that you have made. This is really a journal editorial board unlike anything I have seen before. And so congratulations for that. I really appreciate what you said about intentionality and working hard to reverse invisibility, and I hope we can come back to that. Alex, what are your thoughts on solutions and changing the status quo here? Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think Catherine's comments were really inspiring. I think that's a unique, unusual success, and that speaks to how the way the knowledge system is organized. Most journal editors are not like Catherine. They're not motivated to do these things, and there's no shortcuts. You can't just say, "Oh, we now endorse equity, diversity, and inclusion," and expect everyone to come. You have to actually do community building, which it sounds like Catherine has been successful at. PLOS already, had a good reputation to this to some extent, but when I started, when PLOS 1 started, I think it was in 2006, 2007. I was involved with their first large journal, and when they were recruiting associate editors, I would put up some names, and they would say, "No, that person's too junior. That person's too junior. This is just for the editorial board." So I think those kind of policy shifts are important, but to get the submissions to come, like Catherine was referring to, you really have to do some kind of community building. She mentioned the word snowballing, and that's difficult in a lot of cases where the journal is just sort of inherently hierarchical. You only have a certain number of slots on an editorial board. So I like to see movement towards making it more crowd-oriented in the processes. So, for example, open peer review or crowd peer review, as well as changing policies such as the names that are attached to articles and moving away from the traditional authorship concept to what we call contributorship. So all people who are associated or contribute to research should be named on an article, not just those who are involved in the writing, unlike what the International Congress of or Committee of Medical Journal Editors says, which is that you have to be participant in the writing in order to be named as an author. Really, I've given up on a lot of journals, and I think we have to unbundle and not rely on the journal with all the chief editors having as much passion or initiative as Catherine. Instead, really getting more towards the grassroots in our communities by breaking apart the publishing and the reviewing and so on.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Alex. Kui, why don't you come in, again, bring your perspective as an African woman researcher. What do you see are some of the big possible solutions? And also, I'm going to add an extra question perhaps for you. What do you think, researchers who find themselves in these positions can do? How can we inspire more people to step up and ask for a more equitable space?
Thank you. Not sure I'll be able to tackle the second one, but I'll try. So I think in terms of the way I've thought about solutions and what my intervention is going to be for this particular question is two levels, at the individual level, and then I think at the broader kind of system or funding level. So speaking as an African to Africans who are on this call right now, and not just Africans really, I think people who come from or who identify as coming from a history of colonization, I think one of the first things we need to do is decolonize our own minds. I think this is really, really important because many of us who are in situations such as the one that I am in, you're highly educated, maybe you have a PhD or whatever, you're higher up in the academic or professional scale. I think many of us have become victim to what is known as elite capture. So we judge ourselves, our merit, our worth, our credibility based on what the global North defines as success. That is what, we consider ourselves successful if it's by certain standards or merits that are endorsed by the global North. And I think we need to start changing. We need to start with a process of honest and kind of critical self-reflection to start questioning why is this the case. And I'll give my own example. So while I was doing my PhD and in the first few years after my PhD, one of my greatest aspirations was to publish in some of these high impact factor journals. Why? Because I had been told that is the measure of success as an academic. If you want to be someone who's worth your salt in academia, you need to have published in X or Y or Z academic journal. And so I bought into that and I was trying very hard to get published in these particular journals. And it took me a long time to start questioning, okay, but actually why? And who is the audience of that journal? And yes, great, it'll help me progress in my career and it'll help me kind of get funding, secure funding, attract funding. But so what? What does that actually mean to the communities on the ground that I am working with, to the mothers and the children that I work with on a daily basis doing my work? What does that actually mean for them? And so I think for those of us who come from this kind of histories, we really do need to start with a process of self-reflection to decolonize our own minds, to just not get co-opted into the system without questioning it, without challenging it, without pushing back. And even if nothing will change in our lifetimes because systems take time to change, at least we will start the conversation so that those who come after us don't feel that the only way they can measure their success or their worth as an academic or a researcher is if they're published in a particular global North journal. And I just want to point out, I saw a question, I think from Sunita, and I know we'll come back to questions about if journals are open access and anyone can access them. Does it matter if we're publishing in global or regional journals? I think the problem, Sunita, though, is global hasn't really been quite global right now. What global really means in our current context is global North. And so that's why I think there's need to start strengthening regional and local knowledge platforms, because only then can we also shape the agenda of how we want, research and we have some capacity to kind of shape the research agenda, because otherwise what is currently termed as global journals, they're not really global, actually, they're just global North. So I think the first step is individual. But the second solution that I think, and I know Johan will have some comments to add this, but I'll say it anyway, is that I think funders can play a role also in strengthening local knowledge platforms, in strengthening local journals as well. funders are very powerful when it comes to shaping the agenda. I have seen that in my own career as a social scientist. When I first started research, social scientists were relegated to a corner somewhere, just do your little thing there, you know, good for you and your qualitative research. And then funders started demanding even of basic scientists to include some elements of social science in their funding protocols. If you're doing a large-scale clinical trial, the funder will come back to you, yes, but where's the social science in this? Where's the human aspect of this? And then we started seeing things changing. Now social scientists are brought to, well, we haven't gotten to where we want to be, but at least social scientists are being brought to the table, you know, right from the beginning, not as an add-on. It's like, let's build this together. Let's think about this study question together. Let's design this study together. So I do think funders can play a very key role in strengthening local knowledge platforms and local journals, as much as I understand there's global politics around the funding of these journals.
Thank you. And we'll come back to my other questions on, you know, what can researchers do as well, right? Johan, you're on now.
Yes, thank you. I'll try to address some of Kui's questions, hopefully. First of all, I think, coming back to rewards and incentive system, we need to change the rewards and incentive systems. There are already some initiatives underway there. First of all, for instance, Coalition S has a principle 10 that says that the funders will no longer look at the quantity of publications and the venue of publications, so the important prestige journals, when they assign funding. So that is when they select funding. So that is, I think, already very important. It's the first step on the way towards reforming the rewards and incentive system. And for the rewards and incentive system, there's also the Global Research Council and South Africa. And also there's an initiative from the EU that is starting now to change the research rewards and incentive system in the world, actually, of academics, because we all know that the way it is now, that it can go on. Now, of course, it'll be a long time before that trickles down to all the institutions, but the efforts are underway. That's the first thing I would like to say. I mean, there is some hope that this will take place. The second thing is about, again, from my perspective as a journal editor and as a director of Coalition S, we need a globally equitable publishing system for academic publishing that is not author, that has not non-author facing fees, so that where the fees, in fact, were either as an author or as a reader, you don't pay. And basically the payment system is something that is taken care of by institutions, funders, ministries, it's basically like a public system. That is basically what we want. We need a system that where, in fact, you have an invisible system of payments for academic publishing, and that system is tied to purchasing power parity. Namely, not all countries pay the same, and they pay as a function of their means. That is what I truly believe. I'm writing a paper on that idea as we speak. I really think that, at least for what as far as commercial publishing is concerned, so that's the journals that we know, that we don't always love, but that we know, they are not going to go away. So the least they could do is to be globally equitable, so that everybody has access not only to read but also to publish. First thing. Second thing is, I think we need to support much more diamond publishing. Diamond publishing is publishing that is scholar-owned and led. That is what Kui was also referring to, scholar-owned and led publishing. You own the journal and you hire the services of a publication services provider, for instance, for your submission system or for copy editing and typesetting, but you own the journal as a scholar. Diamond publishing, I mean, we did a study on that. Diamond publishing is very diverse in terms of the disciplines covered, in terms of also, it's a number of very small journals. They are all isolated. And they also testify to what we call now bibliodiversity, namely publishing in very many different languages. And in order to address that issue of the isolation of these diamond journals, of which there are between 19 and 26,000 in the world, probably also including many journals from the global south, we are launching a diamond action plan together with Science Europe and French ANR and Coalition S. You can find it on the web, action plan for the Diamond Open Access. I would urge you to please sign it, because I think that's the way of the future. We need to take back academic publishing into our own hands as scholars and make sure that we control it, and that we are able to create a system, again, a global system in which we can control this and also make it sustainable in the long run. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you to all three of you. Well, we have a really wonderful set of questions that have been coming up in the chat box and that have been organized. So let me maybe pose a couple of questions there and then, you know, take a round of responses from us. So first, there's a question that maybe, Catherine, you could take on when you described the need for checks and balances on the value that we're trying to create as academics with publications. What would those checks and balances look like? You know, what would be your top picks, in a sense, to make, you know, to make change? And then another question that, you know, that Sunita asked is, in the chat box is, you know, we are living in an era of open access. So, you know, the old days where your institution only subscribed to a few high impact journals, you know, those were really the only ones that people got to see, perhaps. That doesn't apply anymore. A lot of information and papers are widely available. So in that situation, does it matter, you know, where researchers publish, you know, whether you publish in sort of quote unquote global high impact journals or more regional journals, or perhaps even global journals that aren't as high impact, but actually make knowledge more accessible. So maybe Catherine, you could go first on that, and then Johan and Alex, from your perspectives, because this is a set of questions that's really focused on journals. And then I'll come to a next set of questions after that.
Yeah, I mean, I think my response will really be from an institutional perspective, an academic institution, a research institution, some of the things you can do. And I've posted something in the chat that at HRC, we don't reward impact factor. We just want your paper published, because your intended audience is that it's accessible. Somebody can be able to, even though they Google, that your paper can come up and be read. So the journal is indexed. It's not, you know, some shady kind of, you know, publication machine, and it's open access. Then that's all we require. And so rewards are not distributed based on impact factor or whatever that means. And then at a certain level of seniority, we stop rewarding papers. It doesn't matter how many papers you publish, you won't get any reward for them. And we'll start rewarding mentorship and papers being published by the people you mentor. Because for us, after you get 100 papers, adding another 5 or 10 or 20 doesn't matter really in the bigger scheme of things. So that is a small institutional thing that we are doing, because in the end, if you keep on becoming this leading researcher who keeps on adding 10 papers every year, then you're like this little, we call them the only bull in the corral, and then there's no one behind you. So we focus on mentorship. We want to see you expressing your expertise and greatness into others. But then I think somebody mentioned the question of funders. Funders have a role to play. And I think in the more medium term, in the more long term, for me, I would want to see being able to quantify the expertise that Koi was referring to, and putting that expertise and experience at the same level as papers. So for us, we define an expert based on, yes, they have 100 papers. And in addition, they were able to shape, you know, 3 changes, whether it was 3 policies, or they have designed a program, or they have to set the agenda in some kind of funding, that you use your expertise to do something else. And then of course you can keep on adding papers, but that we put these 2 on the same scale. Because at the end of the day, if I'm an African researcher, I spend a lot of my time on those other things, which are also important. So how do we monitor, how do we quantify experience that goes beyond counting the number of papers and counting the impact factor, you know, the journals in which those papers are published? So funders have a role to play. And I mentioned that there are funders that I'm familiar with who have made explicitly no reference should be made to impact factor when judging the quality of a paper or judging the quality of an applicant. And they say, if somebody has published papers, read them and tell us they wrote a great paper, not because they published the paper in I don't know which journal or the other journal. So I think funders have a role to play, because that's where it begins. If they perpetuate a flawed system, then of course the system will stay being flawed, because everything starts from getting that grant and starting doing the research. Over.
Great, thank you. Johan or Alex, would you like to comment on the,
yes,
on the topic?
If I may, I mean,
Catherine, address the open access question as well.
Well, just on this point of the funders. I mean, that is exactly why we have our principle 10. All the funders at Coalition S have pledged to not take into account the impact factors, to take into account things like the narrative CV, to take into account a broader range of outputs and activities to select funds. So that is exactly what we do. This is exactly the direction that we are going in. And of course, we would like to have more funders adopting those principles. Regarding the other point that you that was made, or that Purnima made about journals, perhaps, if I may, I think you know, does it matter in which journal you publish? And I would say yes, it does. It hugely matters. I am personally, as a journal editor, very much opposed to these mega journals that publish anything and everything, because I think a journal at its base, and this is not my idea, this is an idea by Lucy Montgomery, but at its base, a journal is a community. I mean, that community can be as large or as small as you want, but it is a community. It's a community of readers, of authors, of reviewers, who all tend to share a certain number of principles about what they think is quality, what they think are good ideas, how they think research should be conducted. And that is what forms that community of a journal. And that journal can be, that community can be local, it can be regional, it can be global, but it is a community. I would very much insist on that. So that makes for a very large diversity. You can have communities of Finnish journals. You know, you can have communities of journals about food in South Africa, specifically South Africa. You can have all sorts of journals. So you just, of course, make sure that those journals communicate with each other in terms of their practices and in terms of their guidelines, so that, you know, there is a certain number of quality control there that is shared across journals. But that is something that we can organize. But scholars themselves should organize the journals as communities. I strongly believe in that. Okay, stop here.
Thank you. Let me throw another question out there and actually speak to some of the imbalances that we saw in Sweta's, in Sweta's presentation. Now, some of the imbalances that we've spoken about today are coming from some of the deeper systemic issues that all of you have mentioned about institutional incentives and the changes that need to happen there. But a lot of those imbalances are also because, let's be honest, high-income authors who are leading papers are not opening space to their low and middle-income country collaborators. High-income country researchers or institute researchers, we think it's okay to do research on other countries and not include people from there on our papers. That's a personal choice that a researcher makes. That's a personal choice that a researcher in a high-income country context makes. We haven't really spoken much about that. So maybe, Kui, I'm going to ask you to speak to that first. But also, Alex, Johan, Catherine, if any of you would like to sort of speak to that. It hits to the heart of some of what we're seeing in the imbalances here as well.
Thanks. I feel I'm getting the harder questions, but it's okay.
It's a hard question, not a hard one.
I hear you and I agree. So I should first of all say I'm very fortunate that that has not been my personal experience. I have worked, actually most of the people I've worked with have been people from high income countries, and my mentors and PhD supervisors were that, but they were very good at creating space for me to grow. So I was one of the fortunate few, but I definitely agree with what you're saying. I think what we need to maybe start doing is, again, we need to find a way to start changing and shifting mindsets so that even people who don't realize how harmful this colonial way of working is can understand that it harms not just the oppressed or the colonized, but it harms you and impacts on you, even as the person who's doing the quote unquote oppressing, if that makes sense. And I think another thing, so first, I think we just need to start by trying to help people shift in their thinking to understand that this colonial way of doing things affects everyone. It doesn't just affect one part of the population. But another thing I really like is, for example, what I've seen Catherine suggesting, well, what Catherine said, but also what I've seen her texting in the putting down in the chat box is around we need to start judging academics, and especially senior academics, not just on how many senior author papers do you have, how many first author papers do you have, but on other less tangible things such as mentorship. What nowadays some funders call citizenship, right? What has been your citizenship? And that includes what has been, you know, how your mentoring record, what has been your capacity building record. It's not just about how many papers you yourself have published, but how many other people have you brought into that process? And I really like the conversation that's happening in the chat box around how do we also start judging people or gauging people based on impact, because I think that's one thing that's often left behind in this conversation. What has been the impact of your work to the communities that you've been working with, the so-called affected communities? Because I think many times we do research in a very extractive way. We go, we extract the data, we publish it, we get recognition, we get our PhDs, we get our professorships, so on and so forth. But what impact does it really have on the communities? So I do think there's something that can be done, like an actionable, tangible thing in terms of, and again, here funders can play a role, like when you're judging someone's funding application and looking at their CV, as Catherine was saying, it's not just about how many senior author papers they have, but what has been their citizenship, their mentoring, their capacity building, their community impact, so on and so forth. But ultimately, there needs to be a mental shift. And I don't really know how we get everyone on board with that. But I do think whether you identify as being from a colonized history or a colonizer history, I do think there needs to be a mental shift to acknowledge that these things are harmful to all of us. They affect all of us in an adverse manner, if that makes sense. And to just, sorry, Punima, just to answer your previous questions, your previous question about what can researchers who find themselves in the situation I was describing before do, I actually don't really have a specific answer for that, but I will say this to fellow Africans on this call. As you can see, I'm a champion for kind of us doing the work. We do need to do the work. So and not just Africans, as I say, this can apply to anyone who comes from a history and identifies as coming from a history of colonization. No one will do the work for us in terms of strengthening our local knowledge platform. What we need to do is we need to change the way we think about things. We need to start advocating and agitating for a different way of doing things. We need to partner with people like Johan, who has the funds and is already kind of aligned as an ally, so that he can help us think through these things some more. But ultimately, we will have to do the work because no one will do the work for us. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I think I'm going to count that as perhaps your closing comment, Kui. Alex, why don't you come in, and then I'm going to come back to the panel for really quick closing, 30-second, what are actions we can take, because we'll have to wrap this panel up soon.
Yeah, thanks. To pick up on some of those points, I mean, I think some of it is just attitude change, which is very hard to steer, but we saw, recently some big cultural movements, like Black Lives Matters, Me Too, that were really hard to predict, but did lead to change, and that included some both attitude change in individuals, but also policy changes in societies. And once people felt they had to respond to Black Lives Matters or whatever cultural moment to actually change an aspect of policy, then there's something in there that those individuals who are motivated to continue it on can build from, and they can say, well, why do we have so few people from this part of the world on our editorial board, when in one of our planks that you wrote last year as a result of Black Lives Matters, that we should be increasing the inclusiveness, or however it was stated. So I think there's these teachable moments that you have to capitalize on to push these things. And I like the point about capacity building and rewarding that at the researcher level, and moving away from the concept of rewarding individuals, with research being increasingly collaborative. The most important research, and I'm sure especially in your field, is often based on large collaboration. So what we should be rewarding is often teams. And so we should be centering a lot of our evaluation not on, oh, this principal investigator, has the best CV or even has done the most mentorship. Well, that's part of it. but also rewarding these collectives that are also what can have their own internal policies that help extend and include others, because they develop these communities of practice that are effective for that.
Great, thank you. Shweta, let me call you also back onto the panel now, just as we get to making our sort of closing rounds. So Catherine, 30 seconds from you, what's the next critical action, or what's an action maybe that you commit to take us forward on this journey towards more equitable, visible outputs of the kind of research that is happening here?
I think I would say intentionality. We need to really be intentional about everything. If you have 100 papers and you're writing your 101st paper, you should ask yourself, why are you really doing this? Is it because you want to get a grant to write other papers? And maybe pause and ask yourself, maybe somebody should be writing this paper and not you. So I think being intentional and questioning things that we took as normal. And so mine is to continue questioning everything we had normalized. And I think I would request that we all do that.
Thank you. Alex, what's your sort of action commitment next point?
Well, for me, because I think journals are too slow to change, despite a few notable exceptions mentioned by this panel, I'm oriented towards like exploding them or doing end runs around them to make reforms more rapid in other ways. So one of those, for example, is preprint. So and that's been one of the most successful things I've seen over the last 10 years in terms of open access, is just certain fields shifting towards making their research available immediately, not waiting for the 12 or even 3 months that it takes to get through a journal. But also once those preprints are out there, that's led there would be the ability of new platforms to bloom, including crowd peer review, open peer review, and thus a more community-based and open infrastructure, which funders are also increasingly supporting. So I would say as something that people can do at any level of seniority often is to post preprints and try to get involved in advocating for that.
Great, thank you. Johan.
Yes, in addition to what Alex said, there's also, of course, journal independent peer review, which is provided by services like Peer Review In, for instance, which is also really taking off. Journal independent peer review. My action points in the next few years actually will be trying to federate and align these diamond journals that I was talking about, not just in the global north, but globally. What we will try to do with a project called the Amasa funded by the European Community is to federate and align the quality assessment of these journals and provide sustainability for them via a capacity center. That is something that we hope to set up 3 to 4 years from now. And that will be truly a global endeavor, together with people from South America, from Africa, from Asia. That is my goal.
Great, thank you. Shweta, I would like you to maybe give your 30-second and share a little bit with the group on the working group before I wrap this up for us.
Thanks, Purnima. I mean, I'm not sure if I can like any more eloquently put forth ideas, but all I would say is just my hope and encouragement is just for those of us that are early and mid-career researchers to really just situate ourselves in trying to undo some of the learning that has, that has just been, drilled into us over our decades of our studies of how to really change and shape the way we do work and business as usual as it relates to our field. And so I'll just really push for that, and hoping that one of the ways in which we can continue these types of discourse, I'll just quickly share my screen here, is just to say, for those of you interested in the work that ANH Academy is doing on inequities in ANH research and practice, to go to the website that has some of our activities listed, and just ways in which that you can engage. And we're really hoping for active participation. And these are the ANH members that are currently working on these issues. And so feel free to reach out to any one of us at any time. And with that, I'm going to turn you over to Purnima again.
Thank you so much. Well, I could hardly hope to summarize anything here But it's been an incredible honor to have had this conversation and have hosted this conversation from, with all of you on the challenges, but also on the solutions. And I have to say that, I'm really leaving this conversation, despite having been absolutely appalled and depressed to see the numbers, Shweta, that you presented from the review of the papers published in our field. I also leave energized broadly with the recognition that if the system is broken, it's because people haven't found power within every little space that we inhabit in this system of academic publishing to make the change that we can. And so, I think what I want to exhort us to do is to find the power in ourselves from every single space that we inhabit in our knowledge system, whether we are funders, whether we are research collaborators, whether we are lead authors, whether we are co-authors, whether we are peer reviewers, whether we are journal editors, whether we are high-income country researchers or researchers from low and middle income countries. I think every single one of us has power. And if we can find that power, from who we are and where we are at that space of time and in that moment, I really think we can move the system forward to a better place. So I call on every single one of you, in this meeting, not in this meeting, but every single one of us in the research ecosystem, I call on every single one of us to make a commitment to look hard to find and to acknowledge the inequities, the roots of the inequities, which are really the broader injustices, and then to find the power within us to make that change slowly but surely. I have no doubt that, 4 years from now, I hope that review of articles will reveal something very different. And that review of journal editorial boards will reveal something very different. And hopefully that review of, who's doing the research, where are funds flowing, will also show differences. So I think the onus is on every single one of us. And those of us with more power and more privilege really need to do more. So I call upon all of us, especially our high-income country researcher colleagues, let's do better. We need to do that. Thank you. Thank you, ANH, for this incredible session. And thank you, Catherine, Alex, Kui, Johan, and Shweta. It's been an absolute pleasure to spend time with you today.